Good morning and Shavua Tov. I hope you had a great Shabbos. And we are discussing a little bit about the oral Torah. This is the month of Sivan. In fact, these are the final days of the month of Sivan because Thursday already is the beginning of the month of Tammuz. So in these final days of the month of Sivan, what we're talking about is the oral Torah. Because the reason why we're speaking about that is because Sivan obviously is the month of the giving of the Torah. In the beginning of the month, on the 6th day of Sivan, the Jewish people received the Torah at Mount Sinai. But what I'm trying to explain and make sure everybody understands is that the oral Torah was not something that was added on additionally later on by rabbis or rabbinical sources to explain or interpret the Torah. On the contrary, the oral Torah is really the full body of all Torah knowledge. The written Torah are just like notes that refer back to them. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, one of the great German Jewish rabbis in the 19th century, he gave an example. He said, if you ever have been to a university course throughout a semester, you may have in your notebook some little notes from each class, a few little points here and there that are meant to jog your memory and to bring back the entire information that was transmitted by the professor throughout the course, right? So he says that is the true relationship between written Torah and oral Torah. Oral Torah was like the course. God was speaking to Moshe orally. Moshe transmitted that information to his students and disciples orally, and ultimately to the entire Jewish people orally. The written Torah was the Cliff's Notes, so to speak, or the notes that were taken, that were actually dictated by God after the lecture to use to refer back to the lectures to recall and restore the information that was given during the entire oral part of the lecture. And the greatest proof of that is that if you open up the Torah, there's really not a single commandment in the Torah. Now remember, the Torah is a book of mitzvahs. Ultimately, it's a book of mitzvahs. It's a book that teaches us Jews how to live our lives in the fullest way, in a growth-oriented way, to build a relationship with Hashem. So the mitzvahs are the critical part of the Torah. If you open up the Torah, there's practically not a single mitzvah in the entire Torah that you can understand and know how to perform just by reading what is written in the written Torah. Okay? It's not enough. So for example, in the Torah it says that Rosh Hashanah, right, the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, will be a Yom Teruah Yelachem, a day of blowing it shall be for you. That's all the Torah says about Rosh Hashanah. Now we know what that means. We know it means you take a shofar and you blow the shofar and you blow shvarim, trua, tekiah. We know all the notes. We know what the shofar looks like. We know what it's made out of. We know it comes from a ram's horn. All of these things we know from the oral Torah. But if you just read the Torah, you wouldn't have any idea what to do. What am I supposed to do? Gather all of my inflatable objects on this day and inflate them? It's a day of blowing. Run up to your friends and go, what does that mean? So the written Torah doesn't give us the knowledge that we need. It's the oral Torah that gives us all of the knowledge. I'll give you another example. It says in the Torah that a man should wear totophos beinei necha. He should wear something called totophos between his eyes. What are totophos? Well, we have no idea. If you only have a written Torah, you have no idea. But if you have an oral Torah, you know that totophos are tefillin. And tefillin are black leather boxes made out of a kosher animal that has 4 different parts of the Torah written inside of them. And they go up here on top of your head. And there's one on the arm as well. It's all explained in the oral Torah. The written Torah is just there to reference back to the oral Torah, which is where all of the true knowledge remains. Now, eventually the oral Torah was written down, and we'll talk about that soon, maybe tomorrow, when it was written down and why it was written down, and most importantly, we have to address if it was transmitted orally for 1400 years, why is it just not like a game of broken telephone? Why didn't it just eventually get distorted completely? So we'll address those issues later in the week. But for now, have a great day, everybody, and a great week.